welcome to another edition of A Preacher and His Work. We have so many gospel preachers from across our country and around the world, and this is our way of helping you get to know them just a little bit better. And we're still coming to you from Polishing the Pulpit in Sevierville, Tennessee, and we are so thankful to be able to be a part of this work. And we are going to have a special edition of A Preacher and His Work with this episode, and we are talking with Brother David Peterson. And Brother David, I appreciate you being willing to talk with us a little bit more. In our last interview, you made mention of you coming out of Hinduism and Islam, and you had quite the journey to get to the truth. And I was hoping that we could talk about that a little bit more.
Yep.
You grew up being taught Hinduism, if I'm not mistaken. What caused you to start searching?
Well, as you know, Hinduism is basically works-oriented.
Right.
And my dad and my entire family was in it. And I don't know, I think God was working very early in my life, because I was more like I was questioning things. And down the road, we used to do things so blindly, putting flowers on a bike and, praying in front of a bike or something like that, and things like that. Didn't make any sense. But I started searching, and I was asking my dad questions. But in that culture, you don't ask dad a question, because dad says, well, grandpa did it, so, you just follow. Don't ask questions, just keep going. But one of the things that happened is I had an opportunity to go to Catholic school. And boy, going to Catholic school is a privilege, and at the same time, that kind of opened up some things for me, because you had a little bit of Jesus, Mary, and things like that. Mm. But at the same time, again, there too, works-oriented salvation. I was an altar boy in the Catholic Church, so I got inside and asked the priest, we call him Father, and boy, again, he said the same thing, just do what you're told to do, boy. And we were drilled in the doctrine. Even now I can quote Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou, the creed and stuff like that. But I got a good taste of that. And again, deep inside, there was a void. I was searching and talked with friends, then started saying, let me explore Islam, because the population surrounding us is a lot of Muslims. India has the second largest population. And when we talk about Muslims, we never had the thought, we are, against each other or anything like that. We are just friends. In fact, one of my best friends is from Islamic background. I had a great time. And boy, he said, you know what, why don't you come on over to the mosque? And boy, I would go to the mosque and do whatever they did and listen to the imam and continue in that path. So you have one leg in Islam, one leg in Hinduism, and one leg in Catholicism, and boy, you come to a conclusion, all things are fine, everything is going the same direction. And so I was there in a lot of time, again, that void, that emptiness. And then finally, I said, okay, because of my background and some of my family who worked with the British Army, one was General Peterson. And he persuaded some of my family way back then and planted probably a seed of Lutheranism. Mm-hmm. And that floated in. So even that was kind of floating around. So there is so much of syncretism, especially in India. If you live there, if you're not careful, you are kind of saying all things are fine. Yeah. Everything is fine. Just go this direction or that direction. You'll find your way. And so finally, long story short, I landed up in the U.S. by God's grace. Again, I think in all of this, God had a plan. Where I am is God's plan. He had a plan for me. And I landed in Philadelphia. I was working there for some time. My boss, my ex-boss, he was a Methodist man. And he introduced me to a lot of biblical background, at least to some extent. And finally, again, I went back to India, and my schoolmate is the one who came out of Catholicism and Hinduism. Now, by this time, I was totally ostracized from my family, because my dad said, boy, this kid is no use. He is searching for something that is already there. and my family was against me. And so I kind of, you go to the Catholic Church and there you ostracize. You go to Islam, there you ostracize, because everybody wants to capture you. They want you to be their disciple, to their gods. And so it really didn't find any way. I'm totally lost. And then finally, this friend of mine, he said, you need to come and take a look at this John Hurt series. And that was a 8-part series. And then we studied that. And then we looked at the old projector with Jules Miller. And we had some sessions on that. So, and I'll never forget. I still recommend Jules Miller film strips to everybody. So, and that really opened up my heart and mind, because I could see the dispensation, we could see the denominational doctrines, we could see how God has planned. Again, I think the real one of the real things is how our God is not a God of chaos. He's everything is organized. You don't find that. You don't find in all these isms, these religions, there's so much of chaos. Once you dig into their text, you'll find so much of chaos. But you find how God had a plan from the Genesis to the maps. He has a plan for you and for me. That really opened my heart, and started studying, searching. And my mother's dream was one day, she was a convent girl to some extent. Again, she was also all mixed up. But deep inside her, she wanted me to be a preacher. I thought that was a joke, because what is that? You don't come to the U.S. to be a preacher or anything like that. And anyway, but again, God had a plan. And so after I was baptized in Bombay in the Arabian Sea, and I left there and I met a couple of missionaries, and I said, brothers, I need to study. Those times we didn't have this online, we didn't have all the resources like we have. We can sit at another part of the world and we can study. You didn't have that. And I said, I need to go. And I'm not interested in the US and things like that. I wanted to study God's Word. Put my time, whether it's 2 years or 4 years or whatever. And so I came back and I got into Sunset School of Preaching. And I did some work at the Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia, just a little bit, and got a transfer, came to Sunset. And after that, boy, I was ready to go. I said, Lord, you're great. And so I came back to Philadelphia. We did Asian work, church plant work among the Asian ministries, Asian community. It's interesting, being in Philadelphia, it's a multicultural place. Being in Philadelphia, I thought, what, I would need to meet with my own community and minister to them. Interesting, that's not how God worked it. Our best work came out of the Puerto Rican community, which is the largest community in Philadelphia. And there was an unreached population. And boy, God took us over there and we started working with them. Doesn't matter. And what clicked was just communication and our cultural background with the food. That just clicked. So I met Lopez and I started studying with him, and boy, that whole family got baptized. And so I never restrict myself saying, well, I'm going to be with this group or that group. That really opened my mind. The message is for all people. It doesn't matter what color, creed, whatever background you are. Our job is to present the gospel. And I worked with a congregation there. It was an African American congregation. I became the associate minister. That was interesting. And then while I was working there, I had to go back. My marriage was arranged, and the girl that the marriage was arranged, she grew up in a congregation, and I became the minister for that congregation there. So we worked there for several years, and the church in Philadelphia called me back and they said, Dave, we need you to come back and work with us among this multicultural ethnic backgrounds. So I came there, we went back, I worked with them. There was a call from Texas, and they said, Dave, in fact, they were supporting us a little bit. And they said, Dave, we want you to come here and just be our interim. And you can go back. This became very interesting. And I said, okay, you see, I'm a city boy. Texas is not part, and especially a small town, 3,000. I come from 19 million kind of a background. I don't think. I said, okay. I came to Texas, and they said, why don't you preach here for a little bit? We are going to have some interviews with some preachers. I said, okay, no problem. I'm out of here. I'm waiting to get out of this place. Well, they had several interviews. And yes, the interesting, again, the providence of God. And then suddenly the church said, you know what? It took 1 year. And I kind of got a little worried because our apartment was in Philadelphia and I had to pay the rent and I'll lose my job. I was working part-time and things like that. And I said, guys, I need to get back. I'll lose my job. It's not like, it's a big city. So things are not, it's different. And I'm in church planting. So anyway, they said, well, just a little while. Finally, the church said, you know what? We have been having all these interviews and we really didn't look that God has already sent the guy in. And so they said, Dave, would you be the preacher for this congregation? I said, well, and now here's the exciting part of this. The entire congregation is a white congregation. Old school, rednecks, traditional congregation.
Yes.
And they wanted me to be the pulpit minister. Now, I've been the pulpit minister, but not to an audience like this. I said to Susan, I said to my wife, I said, you know what, since they told us we'll hang in here, I have no clue how this accent is going to work with the Texan accent. How they're going to understand us, I have no clue. Well, we started, and so it's been 13 years.
That's amazing. And you know, it reminds me, 1 Corinthians 1 and verse 10, be of the same mind, of the same judgment.
Yeah.
And that's only possible
Yeah.
if we have the same standard,
Yep.
which is the truth. And you know, Peter said in Acts 10, God's no respecter of persons.
Yes.
All who desire to live godly or do what's right is acceptable to Him.
Yeah.
That's an incredible story. And I guess one of the last questions I have for you is, coming out of Hinduism and Islam, which is one of the fastest growing religions, if not the fastest growing religion in the world, and even Catholicism,
Right.
how has that background helped you as a minister?
I think the biggest help is I really don't see it as a barrier. Sometimes we can make it a barrier. You know, we wanted to study Islam because it looks like it's becoming a threat. Then you study this one, it looks like this one is a threat. I don't see that. I don't create this as a barrier. I think the gospel crosses those barriers. You just present the Christ, you present the Bible, and the Bible takes over. If you know, some listen, some don't, but you got the book, you got the Christ on your side, and what He did with me. How could He, of all the billion people, take one guy from there and put him in the pulpit over here? I mean, you tell me.
Yes, sir.
And then you have all these different cultural, I mean, your own culture. You have American culture by itself. We're so divided inside, you know. He crosses those barriers. How does He do that? He can do it when your heart is sincere, when you do what God wants you to do, no matter what context you are in. It doesn't matter. So you could be in an Islamic context, Hindu context, any context. The message remains the same. The assignment remains the same. So I feel it is a real challenge. For me, now being in the American culture, I look forward. In fact, now I'm trying to work with the Sikhs. The Sikhs are the guys who wear the turbans.
Right.
I love that culture. It's that, here's this culture. How can God's work go in? It's not by me.
Right.
You know, God takes you through. You just be available and go in. The rest God will take through. Once we start creating barriers and you're so figuring it out, like, now what am I going to do? What 3 pointers should I have? Should I have all the paperwork ready? Should I have all my debates ready? It's not like that. I don't think I ever worked like that. I said, Lord, lead me. I look at this person made in the image of God. We begin there.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get some,
Right.
you know, some problems, but it doesn't matter. At least you can plant the seed. I think that's a great message, because for America, where we are now, so divided, not only religiously or anyway, the gospel remains the same, the message is the same, Christ is the same, the assignment is the same. Let's move in and let's be open and useful.
And the gospel is just as powerful today as it was when Paul said what he did in
Yes,
Romans
sir.
1:16.
Yes, sir.
Brother David, I appreciate you. I appreciate the time you've given us, and I appreciate you, and I look forward to being with you next time
Thank
on
you,
A
sir.
Preacher and His Work.
The preceding program was a production of the Fort Payne Church of Christ TV studio located in Fort Payne, Alabama.